Hello, feral friends and fellow nature nerds. Thanks for tuning in to Dirt Dispatch number 23. I'm your host, Tim the Nature Nerd O'Hara. So the other day, my wife called me on her way home from work and she said, I think I have a dead squirrel in the car. And this is how I know she loves me. Now, I've mentioned on the podcast before that I do in-person programs. And when I do in-person programs, it's always nice to have biofacts, things like skulls and pelts and just basically things that I can show to the audience up close that relate to the program. Now, I'm not a hunter and I don't kill any animals for this purpose. And I don't even wish death on any animal so that I can have something to use in a program. I'd rather see animals out running around in the wild alive and well. But if an animal should die for some reason, I'm always grateful to be able to use it for educational purposes. Now, the most common cause of death, of course, for most of my biofacts has been from car strikes. They get hit by cars. But here's the thing about roadkill. Animals, even big animals that fall victim to cars, end up being largely unusable. It's a very rare instance where an animal gets killed by a car and, say, its skull, which is one of the most interesting things to show, is still intact. But in the case of this squirrel, it did not appear to have been hit by a car. She found it laying under a tree with no obvious signs of trauma. So I'm not sure how this poor fella died. It's possible that it fell, but that's not usually fatal for squirrels. When a squirrel falls, it flattens out its body, reducing its terminal velocity. And like a cat, they usually land on their feet, so it's highly unlikely for a squirrel to fall to its death. Possible, but not likely. Now, a predator, of course, is always an option. We have feral cats, we have great horned owls, eagles, hawks, foxes, and coyotes. But again, there were no signs of trauma like you would expect if it had been attacked by a predator. And you would think that a predator would then, eat its prey. Now, it had been a particularly cold time right before it was found. Overnight lows of below 0 Fahrenheit, not including the wind chill. So maybe it just succumbed to hypothermia. But again, it appeared to be in good body condition, not sick or anything, and it should have been able to survive what is a fairly typical winter cold snap for Wyoming, like the hundreds of other squirrels that we have here. So I don't know what killed it. I don't know how it died, but I'm going to do my best to honor its squirrely little life by using it to teach people about squirrels and their role in the ecosystem. So, other than a dead squirrel, what else have I seen lately? Well, first of all, mallard ducks. Now, ducks aren't usually that exciting, but I haven't really seen any since probably sometime last fall. And recently, a relatively large flock of mallards showed up around the very small piece of open water on our nearby lakes, replacing the geese that had previously been hanging out there. Now, mallards are migratory in the more northern parts of their range, but they do inhabit Wyoming year-round, just as long as there's open water. But whether these were year-round residents or just visiting from somewhere farther north, I have no way to know. But that leads me into something else I learned about recently, which is phenology. That's Phenology. I watched a seminar from iNaturalist about plant phenology. Phenology is the study of how seasonal changes affect the life cycles of plants and animals. So with birds and mammals, it has a lot to do with the timing of migration or hibernation. With insects, it has to do with diapause, which is the insect version of hibernation, or when they emerge in the spring. And with plants, it has to do with things like budding and flowering and going to seed. Now, it was very interesting and important to note how climate change can really impact a lot of these things. If, let's say, the pollinators are emerging earlier because they're responding to warmer temperatures earlier in the year, they might have a hard time if plants, which are responding to daylight length, may not yet be flowering, or vice versa. It's something to think about. The other thing that came up recently that I thought I'd take a minute to talk about was the difference between crows and ravens. My wife was telling me that she saw the biggest crow she'd ever seen, and I suggested that maybe what she saw was a raven. We have both of them here. So what's the difference? How can you tell? Well, first of all, ravens are bigger than crows. Now, Granted, it can be hard to tell if you don't have a reference, if they're not standing side by side. But if you see something that looks like a crow and you think, holy cow, that's a huge crow, it might be a raven if you have them around. Second of all, crows tend to gather in large groups, anywhere from 10 to 20 or more, where ravens tend to travel alone or in pairs. Very rarely they'll form a group of between 3 and 5, but usually not any more than that. Now, if you see a raven or a crow flying, you can tell the difference because ravens' tails are diamond or wedge-shaped, and a crow's tail is fan-shaped. The beak of a raven is thicker and a little bit curvier than that of crows, and they have a shaggy beard, not unlike myself, compared to the crow's smooth throat feathers. Now, crows, of course, caw, and for my wife, because she likes to hear the bird sounds, here's what a crow sounds like. Here's what a fish crow sounds like. It's a little bit of a more nasally caw. And ravens, of course, say nevermore. Okay, no they don't. The call of the raven is more of a gronk. Now finally, if you watch them closely, you'll notice some other quirky details that can help you tell the difference between a crow and a raven. On landing, crows will shake or rearrange their wings and quickly flick and fan spread and retract their tail. Ravens, on the other hand, just fold up their wings and go about their business. Now both ravens and crows walk, but if a raven wants to go faster, they'll hop on 2 legs, whereas crows will just walk faster. So there you go. Now you know the difference between crows and ravens. Thanks again for tuning in. If you want to support the podcast, there's several ways you can do that. You can become a patron. Go to patreon.com/dispatchesfromtheforest to get all the information. Subscriptions start at just $5 a month. That's a pittance. You can make a one-time donation using PayPal with my email address, dispatchesfromtheforest@gmail.com, or using the Cash App and the hashtag ForestNerd. Check out the merch store and get yourself some merch. That can be found at cafepress.com/shop/dispatchesfromtheforest, and then click on products and you'll see everything there is there to be had. You can use my email address to send me an email with any questions, comments, or suggestions for future episodes. And finally, you can follow Dispatches from the Forest on Facebook, Instagram, TikTok, and YouTube. Last thing to say, I'm your host, Tim the Nature Nerd O'Hara, reminding you to go outside and get dirty. Dirt Dispatches is a production of Dispatches from the Forest and may not be used or rebroadcast whole or in part without express written permission.